So a lot is happening very quickly right now, and we need to talk about what voting is, what voting isn't, and how to vote effectively. In order to have this conversation, we need to understand what is happening in this country. Some of this we all know far too well. Wages have been stagnating for decades, the price of housing is through the roof, and very few people's needs are met. But this week, as the presidential debate took over the news cycles, a few other things happened which are relevant. Namely, 4 Supreme Court decisions which you've probably already heard of, so I'll summarize them super quickly and move on to much more important points. But as we consider these, remember that 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote, meaning that they were appointed by the Electoral College, which is appointed by state legislatures, which are heavily controlled by corporate lobbyists. So in a circuitous route, corporations appointed the majority of the Supreme Court against the will of the majority of U.S. voters. With that in mind, the Supreme Court just declared that bribing public officials is legal. They interpreted the Constitution to mean that bribes are only illegal if they happen before the decision is made. So if a judge gives a corporation or person a beneficial ruling, and then the corporation or person hands the judge $1 million in cash, now totally legal. Second is that they outlawed homelessness, saying that states can prosecute people for sleeping in public. So if you lose your job next week and your family find themselves on the street, you could be charged and incarcerated for that, which means that you and your family could be locked in a corporate-run prison. Most prisons are owned by corporations today. Remember that the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery, made an exception for prisoners. So corporate prisons are just corporate slave camps. So you and your family will now literally be worked as slaves for a corporation, and you will not be allowed to vote for the crime of sleeping in public. The fact that states may or may not choose to prosecute and incarcerate people for this is completely irrelevant to the fact that they now can. And we all know who's going to be incarcerated for sleeping in public and who won't. The third Supreme Court decision, which was lost to the news coverage of this debate, is arguably much more important than the first two, and it's the court overturning Chevron. If you don't know what this means, it's easy to learn right now, because every decent lawyer is absolutely losing their minds about it at the moment. Chevron was a legal precedent which gave federal agencies, such as the FDA, the legal ability to regulate corporations. So now that Chevron's been overturned, even if Congress passes laws regulating, say, corporate pollution, federal agencies, such as the FDA, don't have the authority to enforce those laws. And finally, on par with Chevron deference being overturned, the Supreme Court just declared that the president is officially above the law. They decided that the President of the United States is not bound by the laws of this country and cannot be held accountable for their actions. I don't claim to understand the whole scope of the impacts that these rulings will have, but especially in conjunction, it's hard to overstate. Consider the fact that there is now no legal mechanism to control corporate behavior, bribery is now wholly legal, and the president is now above the law. This week, the U.S. changed. There were very, very few and weak leashes holding corporations in check at all in this country, and they just snapped. But for us to understand how to vote, we can't just look at domestic policy, horrifying as it is. A few things came to light about what's happening in Gaza over the past few weeks that the media has not covered much at all, so people may have missed. To vote ethically, we must understand what's happening and where we're at in the arc of that history as well. But please prepare yourself for this, because there's literally no content warning strong enough for what I'm about to say. So if you're in a place to hear things so horrifying that they defy content warnings, right now, from me, I invite you to set this down and come back when you are, or give it a pass entirely. Multiple Human Rights Watch organizations are reporting that Israel is now systematically raping Palestinians, often to death, sometimes with inanimate objects, and sometimes with trained assault dogs. Let's just give that a second. You should doubt things this horrible, so if you have the stomach, please go confirm. On top of that, Israeli politicians have begun openly quoting Hitler as justifications for their unspeakable crimes against humanity. To be clear, I don't mean that they're implying Hitler was wrong, and therefore what Israel is doing is right because it's different. I mean they're referencing Hitler by name as a source for ethical conduct. This is from Israeli MP, which is like a congressman, Moshe Feiglin. As Hitler said, "I cannot live if one Jew is left. We can't live here if one Palestinian remains in Gaza." Regardless of what country it's emerging in, fascism is just one system, and like any delusion, it's self-justifying. So from the fascist Israeli perspective, this makes perfect sense to quote Hitler as a source for good ethnic cleansing policy. They don't see that as contrary or even impolite to say, because, like Hitler, they're fascists. For them, it just makes as much sense as a socialist Democrat politician quoting another famous socialist Democrat from another country. Bear this in mind for what's coming in this video. This is the stage of genocide that the US and Israel are now perpetrating. They are raping people to death with dogs and quoting Hitler by name. That's where we're at. This is Biden. These are Biden's actions and Biden's policies. Biden could stop all of this with a phone call. The whole plan for a ceasefire nonsense in the debate is one giant red herring to distract from the absolute complete authority that the US has over Israel. Without the US giving them millions in aid daily and committing the US military to their defense, Israel would be incapacitated and unable to continue committing war crimes in a matter of days. It is as though the US was sheltering and aiding Nazi Germany while they ran concentration camps. So every day, Biden wakes up and says, best way I can use my authority as the most powerful person in the world today is to continue giving billions to Israel so they can continue their holy work of quoting Hitler, starving millions of children, and raping people to death with dogs. The paint wasn't dry on Biden's aid dock before the US military used it to lure a bunch of people to an aid truck and gun them down in cold blood. That is some classic US-style aid. And it's not just overseas. Biden shut down asylum on the Mexico border. He's building a whole new set of concentration camps for immigrants to the US, and he's funding the construction of dozens of massive paramilitary training facilities for police in the US, specifically and explicitly to suppress US citizens. These cop cities are literally built on a blueprint of an Israeli training facility called Little Gaza, where they teach the IDF how to do the things that I just referenced. So that's Biden. He's funding the most horrifying fascism imaginable in Palestine and doing everything he can to bring it to the US quickly. Now let's talk Trump. A few weeks ago, Trump posted from his personal account a video of what his victory would look like, with the headline, "What's next for America? A unified Reich." Just a reminder, Reich is the German word for realm. So if you mean realm, why switch to German to say it? Well, Hitler called Nazi Germany the Third Reich, and ever since the word Reich has an explicit Nazi connotation. After a bunch of blowback, Trump took down the video, said it wasn't theirs, but we can all see how this isn't even a dog whistle anymore. Trump is explicitly using Hitler's Nazi rhetoric to describe himself. Trump has danced with this rhetoric for a while, saying he wants to be a dictator, using Nazi-adjacent iconography like his new flag. But his dance is moving in circles which are bringing him closer and closer to openly calling himself Führer or something similar. A huge portion of Trump's base already literally call him God Emperor Trump. They put it on flags and stickers and wave them proudly. So Trump posting, being criticized, and deleting that video was just another iteration of the circles which are moving obviously towards explicit totalitarian fascism. And it was done in a way that encourages his base to see him as the noble victim, his honest free speech being censored. You can see this dance in his legal arguments as well. Trump argued in court that the president should be allowed to use the military to assassinate political opponents. That's the argument that the Supreme Court just upheld. Trump argued this knowing that it means, as of yesterday, Biden could legally have Trump assassinated. A Democrat would never get rid of a fascist because behind all the rhetoric, the Democrats and Republicans know they're on the same team. But if Biden wasn't on Team Fascist, if Biden understood Karl Popper, that's exactly what he would do, because he would understand exactly how killing fascists does not make you a fascist or as bad as fascists. The argument that killing fascists makes you a fascist, under its mask, is a fascist argument, saying that a free society should tolerate totally intolerable levels of violence in the most horrifying ways, with no response. Trump knows that he doesn't need to worry about that, because the role of Democrats in the current system is to lose in order to suck all the energy out of people who want real change and move the needle to the right, without making it too obvious that they're trying to lose. But legally, Biden, or whoever holds that office, could send out death squads to kill anyone they like, and it's now completely legal. Just think about that. If a senator votes against something that the president wants, the president can now simply have them assassinated, and that's totally legal. So while the US is still a constitutional republic on paper, the president now has the authority of a monarch. And as such, we are effectively under a dictatorship, as of this week. I know we still have the vestiges of checks and balances, but in my book, a government where the leader can kill any opposition without legal resource is a dictatorship. There's a laundry list more. Trump said that he wants the government to track women's fertility, to monitor abortions. He wants to track Democrats. He loves book banning. His base and allies are the ones passing laws to put Bible verses in public school classrooms. This is a Christo-fascist ideology that's moving very fast. As we all know, Trump is desperate for cash. And one woman is posed to become his largest donor by far. Her name is Miriam Adelson, and she wants to give him $100 million. And she only wants one little thing in return: the promise that Trump will annex the rest of the West Bank of Palestine for Israel. To be clear, the West Bank is all that's left of Palestine other than the city of Rafah, which Israel is relentlessly grinding into bloody dust as we speak. Trump's rhetoric around Palestine has been brutal. I didn't watch the debate for a lot of reasons, but one quote stood out. Trump said that Biden should let Israel go and finish the job, and called Biden a Palestinian, but a very bad Palestinian, a weak one. So like other Republicans who have been openly calling for the eradication of all Palestinian people, Trump is saying that a good Palestinian is a more violent one. That is explicit racist justification for ethnic cleansing. Trump has repeatedly said that he would use the U.S. military for domestic security. Many of us may have forgotten, but he ordered the U.S. military to deploy against U.S. civilians when he was president, and the only reason that didn't happen was because the Pentagon refused to follow the order. That was part of what drove his massive purges of the DOJ and the court systems in preparation for another swing at this. And this is what all the historians say. A failed coup attempt is just training for a successful coup unless the perpetrators are stopped, and they're not being stopped. All of the Supreme Court decisions being made are from Trump's court. After losing the popular vote, he appointed a third of the Supreme Court, and 2 more were appointed by Bush, who also lost the popular vote. It's Trump's judiciary that is actively implementing fascism today. If you look up the word fascism, you'll find a set of characteristics. They include having a dictatorial leader, centralized authority, militarism, and the suppression of opposition. Under the decision that Trump's Supreme Court made this week, we now meet those characteristics to a T. So that's Trump. He wants to finish the job of what's happening in Palestine and plans on using not just Biden's cop cities for paramilitary suppression of the US population, but the actual military, to enforce open fascist totalitarianism that his courts are currently legalizing. I'm trying to make 2 points through all this. The first, and by far the largest, is that these 2 men are pulling in the same direction. Their funders and policies and practices are largely identical. Biden funding dozens more paramilitary police training facilities and concentration camps for refugees with infinite money to Israel, exactly what we can expect from Trump if he's elected. Trump will gleefully inherit and expand on the unspeakable crimes against humanity that Biden is perpetrating. Every president of my lifetime has moved the country towards fascism. I remember Clinton's NAFTA, which was a step towards fascism. I remember Bush's Patriot Act that eliminated our rights to privacy. I remember when Obama began extrajudicial political assassinations of US citizens. Biden and Trump are squarely in this lineage. So rational thinkers are left with 2 possible conclusions. The first is that the system of US politics is catastrophically failing and being co-opted towards fascism, to the point where it's now so broken that, like a beat-up car, at some point we just need to scrap it and get a more functional car. The second is that the system of US politics is working exactly as it was intended to, and that the system of Western capitalism inevitably leads to fascism, that it can't actually lead us anywhere else. Personally, I think there's a lot more evidence for the second conclusion than the first. If this is true, then there's no amount of voting that can save us, because the shift towards fascism is baked into the system from the start, and the only hope we have of a healthy world is to shake off the entire system, get it off of our backs. The Arabic word for shake it off is intifada. So when you hear people say, there is only one solution, intifada revolution, this is what they mean. The system is inherently geared towards fascism, whether on the fast track with Biden or the super fast track with Trump. I am privileged to live in a state with ranked choice voting, so I can vote for everyone who opposes genocide and supports humanity, like Claudia de la Cruz, Dr. Cornel West, Dr. Jill Stein, before putting Biden and then Trump last. My vote will end up going to Biden when it comes to that, so I can vote for a better world. If you're not so lucky, I completely understand refusing to vote for Biden under any circumstances. If we don't want fascism and genocide, why would we keep voting for them? If someone is brutally killing my family, how can I check a box next to their name? I will never tell anyone to vote for a genocidal fascist. Anyone who doesn't understand this lacks the basic empathy necessary to be an ethical human being. And a whole lot of Democrats right now are showing that they don't have that basic human empathy. It's really problematic. And I want to bounce back to the car metaphor for a second. If my car is dying, totally failing, I can recognize that I need a new car and have to scrap mine. And that doesn't mean that I have to immediately stop driving it. It might still make sense to use my terrible, failing, dangerous car to try and get closer to a new car that I want. This is the argument for voting against Trump. Taking any level of political stability for granted right now is a privileged delusion that we simply can't afford. If Trump wins this election, I'm not at all convinced that the United States will ever have another election. The risk in this argument, we all know, is that it's the same one they've been using to drag us towards fascism every election. But the way to break that cycle is not to ignore the validity of that point in context. It's to take meaningful, substantive action against the system that is forcing us to make these choices over and over. It is not a group of people that are the problem. It is the system itself which must be destroyed for us to have any chance of a healthy world. You're not voting for your saviors. You're voting for your enemies. It's a chance to pick which enemies we think we're better equipped to fight, and the real battle will have at least 3 fronts. The first is internal. We all want to preserve our sense of stability and safety, and until we release that, we can't see reality. There's an old saying that the first lesson an ethical person must learn is that they're damned. Under this system of emergent fascism, this is absolutely true. You can either prioritize your individual safety and stability or a healthy world. Under this system, you don't get both. I'm not saying you can't have a stable life while working for a better world. I'm saying that one or the other must be your top priority and orientation. If your orientation is stability, you're not actually committed to a better world, and vice versa. The second front is the system itself. This is where a diversity of tactics are necessary. And we're seeing more and more people learning and practicing tactics of meaningful resistance, and we're seeing the police, military, media, and courts trained to suppress, demonize, and criminalize meaningful forms of resistance. As part of a much broader and holistic tactic set, voting is a little piece of that work. It is an opportunity to shape our enemies and the timeline that we have to work on. That's a powerful tool, but only when used consciously in concert with other, more powerful, meaningful tactics. On its own, voting is perfunctory, disempowering, and under this system is complicity with fascism. In conjunction with other powerful and more meaningful modes of resistance, it's a meaningful tool. This brings me to the third and by far the largest front that we need to fight on, and it is the deep indoctrination of our communities. This expresses primarily as centrism, which is complacency and tolerance for the violence upon which this entire system is built and maintained. The pacification of a huge segment of the population by indoctrinating them into centrist inaction is by far the largest barrier that we need to overcome. As we speak, we're watching a rapid escalation of terrifyingly brutal state violence against people working for a better world. The state is going to work to make that seem as normal and healthy as they can. And one of the largest tools they have to normalize that escalating violence is these corporate-controlled elections. So the largest function of the upcoming election, by far, is this. Whoever wins, the election itself will lend authority to the escalating state violence against the healthiest people in our population. It will pacify the centrists into tolerating and even celebrating the state violence that we're seeing every day against students, elders, healthy Jewish people, everyone else who opposes genocide and corporate Christo-fascist control of the world. So a huge part of our work is helping indoctrinated people see that none of the violence that the US and Israel are perpetrating is ethical, normal, acceptable in any way ever. There is no context that could make what Israel is doing today okay. None. Period. There is no context that could make what the US is doing to peaceful protesters okay. We're watching footage daily of paramilitary, Israeli-trained US police forces beating peaceful elders bloody and hunting black people for sport on the streets of the US. And the centrist bloc has been indoctrinated to think of that as the cost of democracy. It's not. Healthy democracies don't have this. You simply don't see it in any healthy democracies in the world. It is brutal, inexcusable state violence. And it's not separate from what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's the same system. It's not even new here. Everything happening in Gaza was done here, and far, far more when white people took this land. Read the journals from Columbus and his shipmates about their joyful human sex trafficking and torture of indigenous children there. If you're as outraged as you should be with what Israel is doing today, extrapolate. How would you want the grandchildren of those Israelis doing that today to act on that land? If you're white in the US, then you are the grandchildren of those Israelis on that land. So how are you acting? I'll circle back to addressing self-excusing centrism in a minute because it's very, very relevant. But we need to cover some other territory to get there well. All these systems exist in fractals. How we treat each other is not separate from international politics. It's just scale. When you go to bed with somebody, that's political. When you vote, that's intimate relations with another person, just a difference of scale. And the patterns are directly transferable. So when we learn to see them, we can both see a lot more of reality and catch a glimpse of the future. Let me show you. When I was a kid, I thought that scalping was a thing that wild Indians did, an indigenous practice. I was taught this through 1,000 Western movies and how it was mentioned. It wasn't until college that I learned that that is an emphatically European practice and explicitly part of the genocide against indigenous people on this land. The French and English governments could never put enough troops on the ground to suppress the massive and well-organized indigenous governments that existed here, so they weaponized the settlers. They paid European settlers to hunt and kill native people on native land, and the proof that the settlers had to provide of a payable kill was a scalp. Just think about this from the indigenous perspective. A bunch of these ghostly, white, sick people wash up on your shore, all dying of scurvy. So you make them some cedar tea and bring them back to life. And within a lifetime, they're running all over your home, waving some book and screaming about how you're not human because you don't know how to accept their God's love, and just murdering everyone they can find. Not only are they murdering them, they're brutalizing your family's bodies. So some native folks might have been so outraged by this that they brutalized the bodies of a few white people in a parallel way. And immediately, the entire narrative became this pearl-clutching, primitive savages are scalping innocent white people. And this narrative of indigenous brutality spread like wildfire through all of Europe, fueling escalations of unspeakable violence against native people. This is the pattern of wounded perpetrators using their own crimes as an excuse to further harm their victims. Like, ever known a guy who was really obsessed with preventing his girlfriend from spending time with other guys, had to check her phone all the time, constantly imagined her cheating on him? Spoiler. After October 7th, rumors of brutal sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas spread like wildfire all over the world. Biden mentioned it in several speeches. Now, both Biden and the IDF have quietly admitted that there is literally zero evidence that anything like that ever happened. But if you mention the unspeakable sexual crimes that Israel is actually committing today with trained dogs, you are guaranteed to get a response of, "But Hamas, Hamas, Hamas," in response. So just like how I grew up thinking that scalping was an indigenous practice, there's a whole generation of people who will think that Hamas is the primary perpetrator of sexual violence in this conflict and Israel is the victim, when the truth is the exact opposite. Look, let me show you something. This Israeli woman was captured by Hamas on October 7th and held hostage by them for months. The entire time, by her own initial account, they were nothing but respectful to her, never touched her at all other than medics treating a wound. When they freed her, she, pretty shortly thereafter, got this really radical nose job for her self-image. That part's all objective. The rest is a mix of some things that she's mentioned, some other internet breadcrumbs, and conjecture, so take it with a grain of internet salt. But it sure seems like she was so profoundly convinced that Arab men must be these brutal sexual assaulting monsters that she went through a process of crippling insecurity over fear that she wasn't pretty enough for even an Arab man to rape. This drove her to such depths of insecurity that she got this nose job to try and make herself look prettier, or at least more white, I guess. There is so much in that anecdote that you could write books on it. But my point here is that from the colonial lens, her perspective makes perfect sense. As an Israeli today, she is fully aware that her brothers and friends are out joyfully raping Arabs. Is she not pretty enough to be raped by a single Arab man? That's the mentality when you think that sexual violence is sexual. It's not. It's kind of a misnomer. Sexual violence is about domination, subjugation, control, and harm. It's only sexual in that it's targeting sex organs, but no part of it is sexual in the way that holding hands can be sexual with someone you love and have chemistry with, connective or romantic. Obviously, a ton of sexual violence occurs when people are trying to practice intimacy. Most sexual violence is not consciously malicious, but the blurriness of that line doesn't change the fact that they're two very different things. Actually, the fact that a lot of sexual violence is perpetrated unintentionally while trying to practice intimacy is evidence of how the colonial mind doesn't understand the difference. And not understanding that difference is why that woman thought she needed to get a nose job because a group of Arab men didn't assault her. She doesn't understand that even with a whiter-looking nose, the same group of men still wouldn't assault her. They just want their country back and your country to stop brutalizing them and stealing all their land. Those Arab men know what sexual violence is. Israelis have been systematically doing it to them for generations. As you watch this, Israelis are sexually assaulting Palestinians in unimaginably horrifying ways, and through all of that, those Arab men have retained the health and humanity not to reciprocate when they were in a position of power. When we talk about indigeneity in the Middle East, this matters. Who is behaving like a colonizer, and who is behaving indigenously? Who is clear-cutting millennia-old olive groves and raping people to death, and who is tending the olive groves and the women that they have power over with respect and care? The fact that these systems exist across fractals at different scales is why the work of healing can never be isolated. Trying to heal just our community, just our house, just us in any way, is creating a bubble of privilege at the expense of more marginalized people. I'm not saying we shouldn't work at local and domestic scales. We absolutely have to. It just has to be grounded in solidarity and consciousness of intersectional liberation across the other scales of the world. If our work isn't done in solidarity and mutual aid at every scale, it isn't actually liberatory at all. This gets us back to addressing centrism. Here's the thing. Most political arguments start from one of two places. The first is, your life is hard. It's not fair how hard it is, and I'll make it less hard by changing something. The second is, times are hard, things are always kind of hard, we're doing the best we can, and the current system is the best we're going to get, so stay the course. Trump starts from the first position, acknowledging that things are hard and unfair. It's a stance that most people today can readily agree with and understand intuitively, so it has huge appeal. As wages continue to stagnate and things get worse, that stance will gain even more appeal. From that emotionally resonant foundation, Trump takes a series of steps. He says, things are hard, it's not fair for you, and it's because of those people. Depending on the speech, those people might be immigrants stealing jobs, woke people making up genders, the media lying to you, all sorts of other those people. This has great emotional appeal because it's palpable and addressable. We can stop those people. Then things will be more fair for me. My life will be better. Biden starts from the second position. Times are hard, things are always a little hard, but we're all doing the best we can. The current system is the best we're going to get, so stay the course. It's a little harder to see, but this is also an emotionally charged position. The emotion for this one is the desire for stability. When things feel unstable, people want to provide for their families as best they can, retain some safety in an unsafe world. And this stance offers them that. There are centrists who believe both positions, and for the centrists, they have the added appeal of excusing them from action. Many who support Biden accept the idea that we're all doing the best we can, that the system's the best we're going to get, because it means they don't have to do anything, which is an understandably appealing position, because what are you supposed to do? It's not clear. So you get why they like this. It's a belief that allows them to not risk anything or act. Many who support Trump believe his position because they can pass it off to Trump to fix the system, and their part is just supporting him to fix things, so they also don't have to risk anything. Obviously, there's another whole block of Trump supporters who are willing to risk and act for their beliefs, but that's a different and exponentially smaller demographic than the conservative centrists. Unfortunately, both Trump and Biden's narratives are lies, and they're equally dangerous lies. Your life is hard. Things are unfair. That part is very true, but his conclusions don't actually follow. Look at what happened in Florida when DeSantis cracked down on illegal immigrant labor. Crops were rotting in the fields, hotels were degrading into squalor, whole sectors of the economy began to crumble because illegal immigrants packed up and left to avoid DeSantis' persecution. So back in the real world, illegal immigrants are the backbone of a bunch of U.S. economics. And the limited resources that they take in terms of social services and support systems are a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket of what they do for the American economy. Crime rates, especially for violent crime, are far lower in illegal immigrant populations than citizens. Scratch the surface of any of the other groups of those people, and the arguments fall apart just as fast. A bunch of my conservative family still actually believe that there are litter boxes in public school classrooms for the pandemic of prepubescent trans furries. If you can see how absurd that is, let's look at Biden. Biden's axiom is that the system as it stands, and therefore he, are the best that we can do. But if you look at any comparison, from healthcare to education, life expectancy, infant mortality, the US is simply in a death spiral. Education is the indicator for where a society is headed. And friends of mine who are college professors are quitting because entire incoming classes can't do single-digit arithmetic, let alone division. They don't know what it means to categorize data, to put data into different categories. I am not critiquing these young people at all. My point is that their outrage is wholly justified and should probably be far larger than it is. And these kids have other crazy intuitive skill sets that I don't understand. They can smell AI generation from a mile away in a way that this elder millennial can't yet. But if we're putting kids through 12 years of school and they can't divide 7 into 20 or plot how many spoons, forks, and knives are in a drawer on a bar graph, that is a systematic failure on a scale that's hard to even comprehend, and it has impacts. This is not separate from the maintenance of a passive centrist bloc in the body politic. It's the foundation of it. We are failing in our duty to upcoming generations in a way that's very hard to describe, and it's getting worse by the day. Colleges are already using AI for grading, so college is now just students submitting AI-generated content for AI-generated grades. We might as well spare everyone the 4 years and tell AI to run the whole sequence at once, trade $200K for a diploma, and we can take bets on what GPA it'll spit out. 16% of Americans between 18 and 24 say that they are not sure the world is round. That rounds to 1 in 5. Compare those numbers on education, healthcare, happiness, anything, to any other country with anything like our level of wealth, and the catastrophic failures of the US become impossible to ignore. Compare them to most countries far poorer than the US, and we're still doing terribly. I've taught high school immigrants from what Trump would call whole countries, and their levels of science, math, everything are what I was learning in college. All they're doing is learning English and feeling bored and really confused at the fact that their teenage peers can barely read. So when the Democrats tell you that we're doing the best we can and we should just stay the course, that is just as absurd as Trump saying that illegal immigrants are the problem. When people aren't educated, all they can do is make decisions based on emotions. Structural ignorance locks them into servitude to corporate media and therefore corporate politics. So the pathway to dissolving the passive central bloc, both right and left, is popular education. It's the only pathway, and we have a ton of remedial work to do because obviously our educations have been sorely lacking. The state laws being passed today requiring the Bible to be taught in schools, requiring classrooms to display biblical texts, are on a dangerous trajectory. They are just a step or two away from requiring teachers to swear loyalty oaths to the country and only allowing Christians to teach at all. As a teacher, I'm in community with a lot of wonderful teachers, and most of them have left the profession already. And those who remain are hanging on by a thread. The pay is atrocious. The parents are absolutely inexcusable, often abusive, and the entire system is so lethally underfunded that it's just an unspeakably horrible work environment. No one's needs are met in a public school. Some schools are so underfunded that they're literally putting school police officers in to teach classes with zero qualifications of any kind. All of this has the effect of driving the miseducation and undereducation of the population, which drives the passive centrist bloc, which supports the shift towards the right and therefore towards the fascism that we're seeing emerge today. There is a massive piece of the population who will hear the idea of only allowing Christians to teach and think that's a great idea because they don't understand what it means. They've been intentionally taught not to understand what that means. I understand my neighbor's arguments for Trump. I understand them because I've read the foundational texts of those positions. I've read Adam Smith, Thomas Friedman, Ayn Rand, Mussolini, and Hitler. Some of those names may not mean anything to you, but I'll tell you who knows those names well. Your boss's bosses know those names. Your senators know those names. Donald Trump knows those names. He remembers the name of the protagonist in Rand's The Fountainhead and says he identifies with him. Paul Ryan, chairman of the House Budget Committee, knows those names. These are the people whose ideologies got us to where we are today, and we ignore them at our peril, because like it or not, we live in their world. Most of my neighbors have not read any of those people, despite the fact that these texts, whether interpreted accurately or not, underpin the arguments that they're making. So I understand my neighbors' positions better than they do, and I can speak those arguments strategically in ways that give them pathways out. Because I've read them, I understand why people think Friedman follows Smith, and I understand how he really doesn't. You can easily understand this too. You need exactly zero education to understand any of these texts. If you pick up Friedman or Smith and read them, you'll understand exactly what they're saying. Smith is someone who conservatives love to reference and would really benefit from reading. A bunch of those names are emotionally evocative. People tend to have strong emotional responses when they hear the name Ayn Rand. And that purely emotional response, with no understanding of what she said, is not constructive. When a conservative with a positive association with Rand meets a liberal with a negative association with Rand, there's rarely any conversation to be had, because odds are very good neither of them's read the woman. So it's just an I like her, I don't kind of argument. I read a bunch of Rand's books and I really enjoyed them. She's a fantastic writer and she makes some really good points that I agree with, and I have no problem saying that or those points out loud. I'm not threatened by her in any way, because in the end I understood her conclusions, I understood the scope of what she was looking at, how it was too small, and how she's wrong about human nature. Friedman makes a lot of fantastic points. His flatteners of global economics are all spot on, and he has a lot of great one-liners that I agree with. He said, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference? Great question from Friedman. And right now he's kind of arguing for Palestine, so the guy's not all bad, and in the end, he's wrong. But it's hard to see why Rand and Friedman are wrong if you only read Rand and Friedman. You might see it, but it'd be hard. To holistically understand any of these people, you'd have to read more. You'd have to read people that you're told not to read. People whose names are slurs in the corporate media. It's just always worth watching who they really don't want you to read, who they spend so much energy trying to convince you to never even pick up, who you're told to hear the same way you would hear the name of the devil. The US doesn't actually ban books in terms of removing them from print possibility, but they just remove them from curriculum and libraries and things. So you can get any book you want here. So who are you not ever supposed to pick up? Who did the US government found an entire branch of the government to suppress the ideas of? Just look up the founding of the CIA, why it was founded to begin with, and ask yourself, would anyone bother founding an entire branch of government to suppress meaningless ideas? None of this is secret. There's a whole Wikipedia page called CIA Influence on Public Opinion. It's a great place to start. There's a whole set of thinkers there, but the one name we've been taught to never speak or hear without recoiling from is Marx. The reason for this is clear. If conservatives ever actually read Marx instead of just hearing his name used as an insult 3 times a minute on Fox News, they would absolutely love him. He speaks to their exact situation, and unlike Trump, who just points a finger at some nebulous group of people in a way that we all actually kind of know is bullshit, Marx offers meaningful solutions. He defines capital. He explains what capital is in a way that capitalism never really wants to do, at least in any real or holistic way. And once you know what capital is, you can't unknow it, and you see the world very differently. And beyond reading the people who the corporate media tells you never to read by making their name a slur like Marx, you'd have to read the people who the corporate media doesn't even dare mention to insult. You'd have to read the dreaded and unspeakable Chomsky. Then you'd understand the system of propaganda, not from a place of just being able to tell it's there and being really mad about it, but seeing its component parts, themes, and effects, and that is powerful. Understanding Marx, Chomsky, Kropotkin, Emma Goldman, your view of the world gets much larger. They zoom out in scale and time, and reveal Rand and Friedman as blinded by how tiny and isolated their views are. Hence why the US spend billions on making you hear their names as demonic. Reading these thinkers informs our emotional response to names like Hitler. Rather than being some nebulous threat, Hitler's fascism becomes a specific ideology in a lineage of ideologies. And then you can understand not just that he's bad, but that he's wrong, and his conclusions are dumb. Hitler thought he could buy power, happiness, and stability for some people at the cost of other people's lives and freedom. And that is foundationally mistaken. I'm not just saying it's unethical, I'm saying it's erroneous. Happiness can never be bought with suffering. It doesn't work. Safety can never be bought with oppression. The foundational mistake that Hitler makes is the same one that Biden and Israel are making today, and it won't work for them any more than it's worked for any other dictator. And it's the same mistake that Trump makes, where he convinces people that the Mexicans or the queers are making their lives hard, when it's actually the self-serving lies of people like Biden, Trump, and Hitler, and the system that they represent, rather than any group of people, which are making their lives hard. Humans have a natural tendency towards desiring justice. When we sit at a dinner table, if one person has 100 sandwiches and no one else has anything, we can all feel how that's not right, and we have a healthy natural instinct to make the situation more equal. How the sandwiches got there doesn't actually matter to our ethical instinct in that moment. Capitalism would watch those people starve to death and not bat an eye. It does, literally, every day. No amount of arguments about free markets and natural hierarchies can ever make one person having 100 sandwiches while others starve feel right. Carry that same true ethic out to housing and healthcare, and all of a sudden everyone calls you a socialist. Rand would love the deregulation of all corporations, and logically, she'd love the legalization of bribes. That is some raw free market capitalism right there. What is an innocent verdict worth? Whatever the market will bear. So today's economy, which is the economy of Rand and Friedman and Mussolini and Biden and Trump, is just one giant siphon to steal the wealth of nations and give it to the most privileged and ruthless psychopaths in a society. Just like sitting at a table where one person has all the sandwiches, we can all feel how wrong that is. It's simply not how you get freedom and stability. It doesn't work. And when people see that, they take action. And there is a long, intense struggle between the people who want to keep all the sandwiches for a few people and the people who want them distributed. Hoarding all the sandwiches has proven over and over again not to work, but the ruthless psychopaths inflicting this ideology on us over and over, mistakenly quoting their totally inaccurate interpretations of poor old Adam Smith and Charlie Darwin to justify it, don't see that. So the working class needs to remind them who has the real power, who made the sandwiches to begin with. But for us to do that, we need to remind our neighbors, because the sandwich hoarders have spent a lot of time convincing them that it's in their best interest to stay quiet and hope enough crumbs trickle down from the great table of the lords and dictators to keep our children alive. And understanding the arguments at play on both sides makes us much, much more effective for ourselves and for others. Even if you agree with most of what I just said, it's hard to apply it in ways that are dynamic and meaningful until you know what dialectical materialism is, what it means, until you know what Darwin and Smith and Rand actually said, so you can strategically educate your neighbors and parents out of the uninformed emotional fractures we're set up to stay stuck in our whole lives. Conservatives love Rand, and they love the idea of Smith, so they're really useful allies. Actually, when you don't tell them it's Marx, conservatives love Marx. Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. Reason has always existed, but not always in a reasonable form. These are deeply resonant ideas with most conservative people, which is exactly why the entire corporate propaganda machine so tirelessly dedicates itself to making sure no conservative ever touches a book by Marx. When you read Rand and Marx, you immediately see that all of Rand's valid critiques are addressed in Marx. Her axiom that your life is hard and not fair, same place Marx starts. But while Rand takes it to a conclusion of, and therefore we should allow corporations to turn every drop of water into radioactive waste if that's what drives the most profits, Marx argues for much more holistic and meaningful solutions. Notice that virtually everything good in the US comes from practices that are far closer to Marx than Rand. Do you enjoy fire departments, libraries, public education? The fact that we have rights in the workplace can't be forced into slavery unless we're incarcerated for being homeless. All of those practices come from socialist ethics, albeit poorly and incompletely applied. All the developments in technology and medicine that capitalism loves to take credit for, completely funded by taxpayers, usually through the Pentagon. The private sector could never front the money for the R&D to develop the silicon chip, wireless technology, meaningful vaccines. These things are all publicly funded. That is a form of socialism. Specifically, under the US system, the creation of all those technologies were publicly funded, and then the profits are privatized. Taxpayers give corporations billions to develop cool new technologies, and then the corporations get to keep the patents and all the profits, which they sell back to the US government. It's a system that Chomsky calls socialism for the rich and cutthroat capitalism for everyone else. But the point is that the things which are more purely socialist, like fire departments and libraries, work great. Contrast that with how you feel about healthcare in this country. How about the recent Supreme Court decisions? These things are explicitly capitalist. One way to put this is that Rand fits inside Marx. He explains her position. But Marx does not fit inside Rand. He's way too big, and Rand doesn't come anywhere near close to addressing the problems that Marx does. And if you actually read them, it's hard not to see that, which is why college, real college, not AI cycles, moves people to the left. When you read the foundational texts, it becomes crystal clear that centrism is compliance with fascism. And it's very hard to come to any conclusion other than one of these. I want to be in the ruling class of a fascist regime. This is what all the right-wing pundits have decided. Or, I'm dedicated to the health and wellness of all people, and this system is geared towards fascism, so I'm going to be called an extreme leftist for believing in basic human rights. Bring it on, let's get to work, because fascism is actually terrible for everyone and everything. This is why the degradation of the public education system and corporate control of the media have the effect of sedating a huge block of the population into impotent, complicit centrism. The way to break out of that, in large part, is reading. Read what you're not supposed to. Foundational texts on all the different positions. Then, like that character in Idiocracy, you'll be in a position of real power. The fact that reading a few books may sound intimidating, that is the effect of the centrist corporate propaganda. Reading's not hard. Compared to how much time we spend on social media and streaming shows, it's tiny. And like anything, once you start, it gets much easier. If you get in the habit of reading a few pages every evening after dinner, in a year, you'll have foundations. In 5 years, you'll be the best informed person in virtually every room, and you'll be able to become a force of real change in the world. We're taught to think reading is intimidating, explicitly to prevent the exact changes that come when we read. It's at the heart of corporate suppression. To be clear, I don't actually identify as a Marxist. Marx was one very bright old white guy who did a decent job interpreting, synthesizing, and summarizing practices which have been foundational to every healthy indigenous culture in the history of the world. And he missed a lot, and he got a lot wrong. A lot of indigenous people have explained what and why far better than I ever could. But for orientation, I'd much rather follow the leadership and guidance of actual indigenous cultures and people than one old dead white guy. But if you want to understand what capital and capitalism are and what the trajectory we're on is, Marx is the best there is, and understanding that may be the key to a livable future, so he's worth the time. Once you read Marx, you'll see that capitalism is just what we call the infant form of fascism. Capitalism always grows up to be fascism. Many people are seeing this right now without reading anything because the masks are coming off. It's getting really clear. A few families have a bunch of money. If there are no meaningful checks in a system against how rich families can get more money or how much money they can get, then of course they use that money to get as much money as they can through any means possible, specifically through the exploitation of workers and land, and through hiring armies of lobbyists and lawyers to pass laws that benefit them. When the amount of money that this tiny group of families has reaches a certain critical mass, they can use mass propaganda, bribery, threats, and whatever other tools they can to simply overwhelm any system of democracy, any court system, and any check against their authority, and then just as predictably as a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, capitalist democratic republic, which grew with so much fanfare about equality and democracy, spreads its wings as unchecked corporate fascist totalitarianism. So the Supreme Court rulings of this week are an open step into fascism. They are saying out loud that bribery of public officials is now legal. It's illegal to put any checks on corporate action. If you can't afford a house, then you can legally be conscripted into a life of literal corporate slavery, and the supreme leader can do whatever they want. It is the ability to see this arc, which is why the entire corporate propaganda machine spends every second trying to convince conservatives to never under any circumstances read Marx. Because all of that is just paraphrasing one theme in Marx, and it's true. And corporate media is terrified that if conservatives read what the man wrote, they'd understand it and they'd like it a lot. Especially if you're another burly white guy, but you have a minimal digital footprint, and you want to do us all a big favor, go describe this exact arc without mentioning Marx and plug in a bunch of conservative dog whistles so that the people who've been conditioned from birth to never read Marx can see this progression. Whatever tools we have to help people see have value, because this is the stage of capitalism into fascism arc that we're in right now. And if history is any precedent, things are about to get much, much worse. You can see a microcosm of this arc in Elon Musk. Guy was all about freedom and democracy until he came under a little fire, and now he's just sprinting towards totalitarianism as fast as his falling apart dumpster fire of an electric truck can get him there. Once you see how fascism is the mature form of capitalism, then you'll understand why the US government founded an entire agency to oppress socialism worldwide and at home, but there is no US agency to oppose fascism. Just think about that. If you want more education around the weave of politics and economics, I really recommend Madeline Pendleton. She's a gem of a TikTok creator with amazing praxis and presentation. And if you want the mythological level work, Twitchy Witch is a must follow. She is incredible, breaking apart wounded worldviews one piece of mythological healing at a time. The last author that I'll mention here might be the most important. He's a Brazilian man named Paulo Freire. His masterwork is titled The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it's a detailed critical analysis of educational systems and tools for popular education. Freire is by far the largest influence on my educational paradigm, and he will teach you to speak and ask questions in ways that actually change the world. He pairs really nicely with Bell Hook's Teaching to Transgress, but Freire takes the #1 spot for me without a doubt. If you do any kind of education, including talking to your neighbors and parents, that book is just invaluable, and it'll give you a lot of the critiques and understandings you would come out of Marx with. For a teacher, Freire punches way above his weight class in terms of scale and insight. He is a hero of mine. If you're feeling overwhelmed, the saving grace here is that the US empire is actively collapsing. We're watching it in real time. Global markets are abandoning the US dollar. Look up BRICS currency. We can all hear the constant massive whoosh of all the domestic wealth of the US being sucked up to like 5 psychopaths competing to become the first trillionaire. 1 in 3 residential houses sold today are being bought by corporations. The mean cost of housing is like 70% of the mean income today. Everything from healthcare to education is being defunded and privatized. Wages are crashing against inflation. None of this is sustainable. Like all empires, the US thought it was eternal, and it stretched. If they had left us a few crumbs, if they had left their victim countries a few pennies, they could have maybe stretched this out further and it wouldn't be crashing like this as soon. But they prioritized maximizing short-term profits over the stability of the empire. And while that might be pure hubris, I think it's actually strategic. They know climate change is real. They've known for 70 years, and they know that they've intentionally set the entire planet on fire, and it's about to burn in a way that will crush every economy, regardless of whether we're making $30 an hour and passive or $7.25 an hour and ready to build guillotines. So they are letting the domestic and foreign empire crumble in order to cash out with as much money as they can before the world really burns. None of this, none of it is sustainable. In 20 years, the world is going to look very different one way or another. How that system crumbles may not matter at all to the people planning on fleeing in deluxe spaceships and hiding in luxury bunkers, but it should really matter to us. Will we be in a totalitarian dictatorship where corporations own all the housing and adults don't know how to add, and the things that pass for conversations are just totally uninformed, incoherent, emotional screaming? That's where we're headed. But for now, we can still speak freely, act freely, and sure, vote. And what we do with these things has the power to steer how this empire crumbles. And what we do with that power will determine how many people we love are crushed under the rubble of this empire with their limp hands dripping blood to feed stray dogs. So I agree with Trump that if Biden was Palestinian, he'd be a terrible Palestinian, because Biden thinks and acts like the most brutal of colonizers. As a Celt, let me say that Biden is an absolutely terrible Celt for the same reasons. Instead of learning from the wounds of brutal colonization of Ireland, he's pushing those same wounds onto indigenous people here and in Palestine. I'm not Irish, but this is why my Irish cousins loudly disown him. Trump, on his father's side, is German. His father was literally in the Klan, and both Trump and his father have been sued for refusing to rent to black people. He, too, internalized the wounds of his ancestors and is now glorifying them and trying to harm as many people as he can. So neither of these candidates are healthy, or even healing people. They're both deeply wounded, and from their wounds, they're wounding as many more people as they can before they finally curl up and die. More importantly, they're both completely representative of a system of harm which must end now for our species to have any hope of a healthy future. And that does not make them the same. We vote for the enemy we are best suited to defeat. Voting alone is performative and contributes to centrist apologetics for intolerable state violence. But not voting at all is giving up a powerful tool to shape the opposition we face. And it is the equivalent of just ignoring the fact that your car is dying and hoping it heals itself without you doing anything. Voting for Trump is a vote for explicit, immediate fascism in the most powerful country in the history of the world, and a damnation of us all. It's the equivalent of realizing that your car is dying, so you spray the upholstery down with gasoline, sit in it, and light a match. I will never tell anyone to vote for a genocidal monster like Biden, especially his victims, which include all of us in one way or another. And if people want to vote for him as harm control, as part of a much larger, more grounded set of tactics to destroy this whole system, I respect that. At the time of this filming, July 2nd, 2024, there are rumors that Biden is meeting in Camp David with his family. It may well be that he drops out. If he can set his wounded ego down, it would be the better thing for him in the country. I hope that he can retire and maybe find some modicum of healing before he passes, as my father did. And who they replace him with will be telling. Track their voting records. If it's someone who votes for military support for Israel, then they are in the exact same lineage. It's no change. The idea of the Democratic Party nominating someone ethical, like Rashida Tlaib, is unthinkable. Even Sanders, who has been a huge disappointment on a scale I don't have words for, would be unthinkable to put up as a candidate because he's not actually a fascist. I would love to be wrong on this more than I have the words to express, and it just won't happen. They'll put up another corporate pawn who will, with an apologetic, sympathetic smile and a lot of meaningless words to the contrary, continue pushing the country towards fascism. They'll put up someone like Kamala Harris or Jared Golden, both of whom are absolutely horrible people who are essentially no different than Biden. It would be smart of them to put up Kamala for the same reason it was smart of them to put a black woman in the UN to block ceasefire votes and a black woman up as the press secretary. It's much harder to critique the violence of state systems when it's being represented by a marginalized person. They'll try and convince centrists that Harris or whoever is different and will actually listen and make change. It's absolutely essential that we see that for the lie it is. Harris or Golden or whoever the corporations put up to replace Biden in this election if he drops out are not our friends, but they may be more accessible enemies, and voting for them may buy us a little more time before we're facing not just the paramilitary cops, but actual military death squads in the streets. I made a video on TikTok a few months ago titled A Suggestion for the 2024 Election, in which I outlined a plan for how we could actually get someone other than Biden or Trump into office. It's late in the day now, but I still think it's a good plan. And if that plan doesn't manifest, then if I lived in a state without ranked choice voting, I would likely vote for whoever the Democrats put on the ticket. Because neither I nor my community are prepared to face a fully militarized fascist regime. And that's where Trump is going. He's not concealing it. He's being crystal clear. We're barely prepared to face Biden's paramilitary police, but we're doing it, kinda, and we're learning quickly, and we're ahead of them with numbers and organization in many ways. If Trump wins and deploys the full force of the US military against the US population, the possibilities of a livable world for my grandchildren drop to almost zero. I can't see a path out of that, at least without a level of global violence that's very hard to imagine. If that happens, I will be praying for an invasion of the US by a multinational coalition for the sake of the future of our globe. If Trump wins and successfully suppresses the US population through military force into the ultimate Reich he is promising, that must be stopped by force, for the same reason the Third Reich had to be stopped by force. The future of the world depends on the people of the United States shaking off their deeply internalized, self-excusing belief that our political system is fundamentally stable and can't get much worse. As of this week, there are no legal checks on what the Supreme Leader of the United States can do. Federal regulatory agencies can no longer control corporate behavior in any way. Bribery of public officials is now completely legal, and you can be incarcerated and enslaved for not having a home. These Supreme Court decisions made this a fascist country. We are no longer degrading into fascism. We're there. It will take some time for the effects of that to sink in and manifest. And by the time we're looking at the manifestations of these legal decisions in the streets, stopping it will be far, far bloodier and harder. We have a minute or two before there's a president sending out death squads to eliminate the families of senators or school teachers or TikTokers who oppose them. But that's now 100% legal, and they only legalize things they plan on doing, ever. It takes real bravery to see this and to recognize that what we're called to do as humans in the world is no longer just provide a stable home for our families. It is to end the emergent fascism of the United States by any means necessary. If the US doesn't devolve into fully militarized fascism over the next decade, it will be because you dedicated your life to preventing that from happening. That means every tool of meaningful resistance against fascism available must be laid out on your table. You must prioritize how you oppose fascism, not based on your stability or comfort, but based on what you as an individual are best suited to. with your strong, brilliant, beautiful mind and body, the worth of which can never be measured or overstated, what can you do to defeat fascism? How can you best organize in community to defeat fascism? The value of our lives at this moment in history, individually and as a collective, is measured by how effectively we organize and act to build an ecologically stable, egalitarian, safe world. And right now, that means doing everything in our power to oppose and overthrow the fascist global superpower which the US is blossoming into. This will cost us deeply, and our complacency will not buy our safety. At this moment in time, safety is not something we can expect. If we have any pretense of safety, it will be because we are hiding behind the bodies of those more at risk than ourselves to delay our own danger at the cost of their lives. Centrism and pretending this is normal will no longer save us. Voting alone will no longer save us. Whoever wins this election, this fascist government must be destroyed. And whoever wins it will oppose us. They will demonize, target, and harm us. Count on it. Get familiar with brutal pain and grief and loss. We will get to know them well with what's coming. Don't push those things away. Bring them in close. They're allies in maintaining the emotional awareness necessary to understand what is happening and seeing what must be done. I am sorry that this is where we're at. I'm sorry that we can't promise our children a better world. And unless we are brave enough to see what is happening and act accordingly, then the world we have to offer them may be one we'd rather they never have to live through at all. This will be a wild time. The tools that the fascists have are unlike any in the history of the world. The emergent fascism is why the corporations pushed so hard for AI. In conjunction with facial recognition, voice transcription, metadata, autonomous drones, and surveillance technologies, AI is the greatest gift to fascism in the history of the world. When weaponized in conjunction, those technologies will give the fascists a level of suppression and predictive knowledge that will seem like prescience. We will face an incredible uphill battle. The stakes are nothing less than the future of the world and everything you love. The fascists, if they come out on top, there will be no hope in mitigating climate change and the planet will become uninhabitable. So please don't just fight like your life depends on it. Fight like all life depends on it, including every single person you care about. If I have any hope to offer, it's this. There are a lot more people who will benefit from defeating fascism than there are who will benefit from maintaining it. In reality, I think that no one will actually benefit from fascism, but that's a matter of education, just as helping our neighbors understand that they won't actually benefit from fascism is a matter of education. So the more educated we become, the more capable we become of liberating our neighbors into the natural allies that they actually are. Basically what I'm saying is, you must become Morpheus. When you read Marx and Chomsky, you gain that Morpheus power. And with a bunch of Morpheuses, we can make a lot of allies very quickly. And, by its nature, fascism is always only fighting from a position of scarcity. They would obviously never say that, but their beliefs reduce down to scarcity. In many ways, capitalism is the artificial manufacture of scarcity, and fascism is the logical conclusion of that manufactured scarcity. We are fighting for abundance. And despite conservatives' bizarre misunderstandings of Darwin, abundance is natural. So we are fighting for what is true, and they are fighting for a tiny, horrible, hate-inducing lie. And truth has power. Nature has power. Abundance has power, and people have power. And all of those things are inherently anti-fascist. This video promised to share how to vote out the Supreme Court, and that is possible, but not under the tiny modern meaning of the word vote. Just like how seeing reality requires reading broader thinkers, to vote out the Supreme Court, we have to go older and deeper in the word vote. It comes from the Latin word votum, which just means I vow. It's a pledge, a promise, a hope, and a prayer. So I ask you to consider what you hope for, what you pledge yourself to, and commit to that. And remember that a vow is long, full commitment. It's not some quick perfunctory thing. If I vow to avenge someone, that doesn't mean this instant, and it may be that my path of vengeance sometimes involves walking away from them. If I just continue walking away from them forever, then I've broken my vow. But if that step away from them is strategic in bringing me back around to them in a more effective way, then that step away from them is part of the fulfillment of my vow. It's the context that determines the ethics of the step. I encourage us all to think about voting in this corporate farce of an election the same way. If that's the sum totality of your action, or if you continue in that direction, then whoever you voted for, you just voted for fascism, and you're betraying your greater vow for a better world. But if you're not in a ranked choice state and you choose to see voting for whoever the Democrats put up as part of an explicit vow to destroy the entire system which is making you vote for a genocidal maniac, that might be an effective part of a larger vow. But again, only if it's in the context of dedicating yourself to opposing the fascism that you just voted for. If any part of you thinks you can do less or relax when a Democrat wins, then a nihilistic part of me wonders if we would be better off with Trump in office, because I honestly doubt that the people who would relax if a Democrat won would actually show up to oppose Trump's immediate fascism in any meaningful way either. So those people will be supporting fascism one way or another, unless they are educated out of the complacent centrist bloc. If you hear someone reduce this video down to, Jack said to vote blue, I hope that you can see how, just like how U.S. history is a massive lie by omission, that would be a massive lie by omission. That is not the point of this 45-minute video with 30 hours of work behind it. I am saying that from where we are today, there is only one solution, and it's not voting. But voting blue could be a tiny part of a broader set of emergent tactics within that solution. We have so much to learn and no time to learn it. There's so much that I don't know that I should, and I'm only aware of a tiny fraction of that. Starting with history. We don't know that the reason the US invaded Vietnam was because Vietnam started passing legislation that actually benefited their population. And the US accurately perceived that as a threat to global economic dominance of the US empire. If Vietnam stopped allowing the US to exploit their labor-earned resources under the banner of free market capitalism, other countries might follow. So the US committed indescribable war crimes and bombed them into the Stone Age to prevent them from becoming a beacon of humanity in Asia. That is some actual US history that we're not supposed to talk about. The history we learn is one giant lie by omission. We know the names of Columbus's ships, but not what the US did to the African National Congress, or how the US literally supported Hitler's rise to power. The truth of US history informs how we see the world, and therefore how we will act today. Understanding what the US did to Libya, Iraq, Guatemala, Chile, Japan, Russia, literally every country is important and we're late. If you don't know the histories of those countries' relations with the US, there's a reason you don't know them, and it's not for your benefit. A huge part of learning that history is learning that this is not the beginning of this fight. We are joining a fight that has been raging for millennia. We're just finally waking up to what's happening and consciously picking a side. The people of the land known as the US have known this fight. They've been living in a post-apocalyptic world for hundreds of years. The people of South Africa and Ireland and Chile and Palestine all know this fight. This is not new to them. And all these people have made terrible, expensive mistakes and learned from them. We simply do not have time to learn the same mistakes that they have made by trial and error with the emergent fascism of the US. So we must join the international movements that we're late to and learn from those communities how to resist effectively and quickly. There is so much that we don't have time to learn, but that we must know in order to have any chance of a healthy future. Central to that is solidarity. There are a lot of fractures and frictions in organizing spaces, and the fascists do not care about our internal differences. Annoying centrist dads who just realize that they need to do something and join the movement with all their racism and sexism. Holier-than-thou queers who police everyone's language in really grating ways. People of color who are really mad and don't make any effort to check their communication. Feral rednecks who've read a lot of theory and come across as super condescending and patronizing. Immigrants carrying a lot of cultural beliefs that many people will find super problematic. The fascists will enslave and kill us all, and they will laugh at how we bickered on the way to the gallows, because we will have done their work for them. CIA training manuals for destroying social movements outline exactly how to create these fractures, how to demonize anyone who is revealed as not being perfect. This fracturing of resistance movements through the perfection politics, disposability politics, and the constant normalization and glorification of punishment is what fascism relies on. It's what allows it to grow. We created the soil that this fascism is growing out of by falling for these fractures. Resistance movements' inability to discern between an imperfect ally and an enemy, while continuing to hold the possibility that our current enemies can be educated and liberated into allies, will cut the hope of a livable future off before it even begins. And the CIA knows this. They count on it. It's a win-win for them, because perfection politics that leave no space to have ever been less than perfect have the effect of driving everyone who knows they've caused harm straight into the arms of fascists, because the fascists will welcome them. If the only welcoming community for people who have caused harm is fascism, we've lost already. Because, spoiler, we've all caused harm. So we're creating an environment where everyone has to conceal that they've caused harm, that they were less than perfect. Or they have to give up and join the fascists, either implicitly through centrist inaction, which is the largest group, or explicitly by becoming right-wing fascists. Anyone who is practicing purity politics, disposability politics in progressive spaces is doing the work of fascism. I'm not saying that we don't need effective processes of accountability and harm reduction. I'm saying that we do need effective processes of accountability and harm reduction, and punitive purity politics ain't it. That's a tactic for maximizing harm, especially over time. People practicing punitive purity think that they're making spaces safer when they're really just driving people towards fascism and making the remaining space a lie built on everyone concealing their harmful patterns so that they don't get crucified. Punishment is so hardwired into all of us that this is another steep uphill battle. But unless we learn this, we're done. I am very well aware that I am not the best person to talk about this, and I was planning on easing into these waters a little more slowly, but we're simply out of time. Legally, today, if Biden's team doesn't like this video, he can send out a death squad and have me assassinated. Do I think that will happen? Probably not, but it's legal now. And we all know that Trump will not flinch for 1 second to exercise that power. He would not stop using that power until he was physically stopped. We are in a very different world than we were in 2 weeks ago. So I know that me saying this might annoy some people, and I'm fully aware of how easy it would be to weaponize, but if it helps a few people see more clearly and gives us any chance of a livable world, it's worth it for me to say it now. I know that in the scales of violence we're talking about, what I'm about to say is like the smallest part, which is why I'm just tacking it on at the end. But these fractals of violence are interconnected, and I have to mention it. The weaponization of dogs against marginalized people brings up a level of physically unmanageable anger in me. I find my whole body just violently shaking in unchecked rage, and I want to use the full force of my power to simply destroy anyone who would do that to another human and to an innocent dog. When I'm not reading from a script that I wrote, if I try and talk about this, my words fall apart, which is rare for me. And I just want to turn all the systems that weaponize dogs and harm people into ashes. The spiky, black-eared goober behind me is a Dutch Shepherd Belgian Malinois mix, so his people in particular are sought out as weapons. It's likely his siblings that the IDF are using in ways that the most twisted horror film director would say is over the fucking line. When I think about the people living through what the IDF are doing, the people not living through it as my siblings, my sisters, my nieces, my uncles. When I think about them twisting my dog's siblings into these horrifying weapons of unspeakable torture, I just don't know how to be in my body today. I've trained in martial arts since I was 12, and I find my body just itching for something to target. And I know that with that level of emotion comes a lot of risk of falling to propaganda, of misdirecting those emotions, of things sneaking out between the seams. So a lot of my wife and my work today is figuring out how to hold space for what's happening in the world while also maintaining a healthy relationship. I just don't know how to live through this time. So this video, for you, is the best tactical strike that I can think to make against the people doing this today, and I hope that you do the same. Today, tomorrow, the rest of our lives. I will vote in November, and that will be the smallest part of my work against these systems. Important, but tiny. I will see you in the libraries, in the union halls, in the streets, where we will be tearing this evil system down brick by brick until every human and every dog is safe and free. Free dogs, free Palestine, free USA, free dogs.